us. I'm going to take a look at the history of ancient Rome. One of the things I always like to start with is the geography. So I thought I'd just pull up the PowerPoint here and kind of take you down through it. Here's the geography of Rome. You can see the map that's here. Hopefully you can see my mouse on the screen there. And you can see that Italy is the home of ancient Rome, although the Italians and they don't really see themselves as unified. They are not unified. The Romans will actually conquer the Italian peninsula before they go down and conquer places like Sicily and Carthage. So the geography of ancient Italy, or even modern Italy, is dominated by mountain ranges. The Alps are located here along up to the north. Let me see if I can bring up a pointer here. Here we go. So the Alps would be up in here, off the map a bit. And of course, those divide the Italian peninsula from the rest of Europe, primarily. Then there's the Apennine Mountains. The Apennine Mountains will go down the spine, we might say. You might have heard recently, just in the past week, there has been a large earthquake about up in this area right about here. The Apennine Mountains are over 9,000 feet high. We also see a couple of seas that are here. The Adriatic, which is over this way, which divides Italy from the rest of Europe. This would have been the former Yugoslavia. And then the Tyrrhenian Sea, which is here. Now both of those are part in the Ionian Sea. These are all parts of the Mediterranean. They're just names for those areas that are nearby. Now, one thing you'll see is going to affect the history, and this is part of the reason I look at the geography, is because the geography and the history are related. The best harbors, if you take a look, all the major cities of ancient and modern Rome are on this side. They're on the west side. Why? That's because this side has the best harbors. Down near Naples, this is a wonderful harbor here, Neapolis. Up at Rome, there's a harbor. You got the Tiber that flows in. There are other harbors along this side. So the best harbors are, in fact, along that way. Then we see, of course, there are two major rivers. We have the Po River, which is up here in the north, Po, and that's very fertile lands up that way. And then we have the Tiber, of course, the Tiber flowing right in here and right down through Rome and all the way out to the sea. Ostia serves as the harbor city for ancient city of Rome. So here is a map that shows us the terrain a little better. You can see the Po River Valley. You can see the Alps up here. Here you can see the Apennine Mountains much clearer. Rome, the Tiber, Naples, Sicily to the south, Carthage over here, and here is Greece, Corinth, and Athens. Some people have described the Italian peninsula as a boot. Kind of looks like a boot. If that is the case, then the football is Sicily. All right. So we also have some major islands that we mentioned. Sicily, there's Sardinia and Corsica. At least those three are major islands that are there. I usually mention Mount Vesuvius. There's a couple of active volcanoes in Italy. Mount Vesuvius is located near the city of Naples. It most famously erupts in 79 AD. We'll talk more about that later. Mount Etna is spelled two different ways. It's on the island of Sicily. The Italians had, and the ancient Romans had, lots of resources that they could use. Building materials such as marble and travertine. Marble is a metamorphic rock where limestone is pressed into beautiful marble stones. It can be a variety of colors. Most famously in Italy, it's a white marble with gray veins, Carrara marble. But they had other marble that they could. This basically means they could build things out of this. Travertine, like you see pictured here, is a sedimentary rock which formed like in cave-like environments. This makes beautiful beautiful stones too. When you cut it, you'll see this a lot in large buildings in downtown parts of cities, banks, and that sort of thing. They also had access to iron in Etruria. Etruria is north of Rome and would be the land of the Etruscans. Lots of lumber, lots of trees up in the mountains, the Apennine Mountains. So they could build a lot of things out of wood, and they had plenty of lumber. And their main source of food forms the Mediterranean diet, some people call it. Very common all around the Mediterranean: wheat, barley, and olives. Olives would be used to make oil for cooking. The oil would be used in lamps. The oil would be used as a skin treatment as well. And of course, you just eat the olives directly as well. Wheat and barley, also very important in the grains. And if you added to that grapes, which I don't have listed here, maybe I have it next. No, the grapes could be made into wine. So you have grapes, olives, and wheat or barley. The Romans also had access to salt. Now we get plenty of salt. Salt for us is pretty cheap, but for the Romans it was very expensive. In fact, our name of salary comes from salt, solus. And Roman soldiers were actually paid a portion of their salary in salt. Because salt was very expensive because it had to be mined. They actually mined it out as rock salt underground. So it was very labor intensive. So this is why there used to be a saying anyway, someone's not worth their salt. It means they're not worth their salary. Just a few important sites. We mentioned Mount Vesuvius. Here's Pompeii, which is near the modern city of Naples, covered by ash. Herculaneum nearby, covered by mud. Same event, when the volcano erupted, produced both ash from the sky and mud that flowed down and covered up the city of Herculaneum. This happened on an August day, just about this time of the year, AD 79. So this freezes in time for us what life was like in a Roman city, prosperous city, but a Roman city in the first century, mid-first century Roman city. So that's very important for us. It's the time of Emperor Titus. It was discovered in the 18th century, really by people digging to build and that sort of thing. Very quickly then, once they realized they could find statues and other things, more people began to dig. So it then became I'll call it a fad, but it's certainly popular to go. When you went to Italy, people who were wealthy would take a tour of Italy, a tour of Europe, the grand tour. They would go there, buy souvenirs. If they didn't dig them up themselves, the local people did. And of course, it's still being excavated today. The work there is not done. So here we see where Mount Vesuvius is located. You can actually see right where the red dot is there. That's the crater of the volcano. You can actually hike up to the top. You can take a bus part of the way up, hike up, and look right into it. You can visit Herculaneum and Pompeii, which of course have amazing ruins and fantastic things to see. All this is around what's now called the Bay of Naples. We'll have more to say about it, but here is, for example, Mount Vesuvius. There's Herculaneum and Pompeii. You know, it hasn't only erupted once, it's erupted many, many times. In fact, most recently, 1944, and these are the lava flows. But most violently in 79. Now, could it erupt again? Most certainly it could, and probably will. The problem will be today, of course, is that so many people live in and around Naples, and it's so mountainous. The roads are narrow. There's a lot of cars, a lot of people. Unfortunately, if we have a major event, a lot of people will probably perish in that eruption. And people perished back at that time as well. These are people who died in the eruption in 79. I guess more precisely, these are the plaster cast of those who died. What happened was, as the excavators were excavating down, they came to hollow spaces, and then they noticed they would find bones and things in there. So they got the idea, and really a very good idea, that when they came to one of these voids, one of these hollow spaces, they would mix up plaster of Paris, a bunch of it, and pour it in there and just fill it all the way up. They would let it sit for a few days until it dried out. Then they would excavate all the soil around it. It would leave the plaster cast of the body. Here you can see a man on his side, perhaps his wife nearby. Here's another man on his side. Here's a guy trying to hold himself upright. And you find animals this way, dogs, people, families. It really is a way in which we can connect with this event in 79 AD. Well, one of the topics of after that introduction, one of the topics of this week is the beginnings of Rome. How did Rome get started? And what sort of stories do we have? What legends, what accounts do we have of it? Here is one of the most famous statues that's connected with the beginnings of Rome, of a wolf, a she-wolf, nursing two young children, two boys. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Rome has 7 hills, predominantly. These 7 hills then dominate the landscape, and of course the Tiber River flowing through it. The date, the beginning of Rome, is dated to 753 BC, and this is in fact when the Romans marked the beginning of their calendar. Just as we mark the beginning of our calendar with the birth of Christ, the Romans mark it with the beginning of Rome. People set their calendars to what they consider to be a significant, not just a, but probably the most significant event. And of course, in the Western world, we date things to the birth of Christ. Even though some people today don't like that, they don't want to call it AD 2016. They'll call it Common Era. They call it 2016 CE. Nonetheless, whether they leave out the AD, which AD, by the way, is a Latin phrase that stands for Anno Domini, the year of the Lord, they're still dating it to the birth of Christ. Here they dated to this. Now, the Greeks would date to the first Olympiad, 776 BC, and so on. We won't go through all the other possibilities. So this date, 753, then, is a significant date for the ancient Romans. It set their calendar. It was their 0 point, so to speak, starting point. This is sometimes called AUC, is sometimes written that way in Latin letters. That stands for Ab Urbe Condita, from the building, from the founding of the city. Urbe, like a word urban, okay, city. From Ab, the founding of the city, the building of the city. Now, these 2 young fellows here are Romulus and Remus, and this is the wolf, Lupus, the This is the wolf, the she-wolf. According to the story that we have of their beginnings, Romulus and Remus, uh, their uncle was the ruler, and when they were born, they were said to have special birth, actually be sort of half gods, according to the story. And the idea was that they were going to take control. And so the uncle wanted to make sure that didn't happen. So he had both of the boys tossed into the Tiber River. He figured they were drowned. That would be the end of the story. But of course, that was just the beginning. The two boys did survive. They washed up on shore of the Tiber. Of course, no one to feed them, nobody to take care of them. And according to the story, a wolf, female wolf, comes by, nurses them, takes care of them, and when they grow up, then they found the city of Rome. Now, the actual founder was Romulus, and therefore city is named for him, Romulus, Rome, right? Had his brother founded a city, Remus, it would be Rheme, right? Rheme, and the Remans, but it's Rome and the Romans, okay? So there's more to that story. You can read about that as well. We can't cover all the details here. Now, there are some areas in which the Romans, of course, were very good at adapting or borrowing, I guess you might say. Of course, I guess we might say plagiarizing. All right. At any rate, the Romans would take material that other people had been doing, and they would adapt it. The legacy that the Romans had for some of their cultural things, we can date, we trace back to the Etruscans and to the Greeks, at least those two. The Etruscans were people who lived on the Italian peninsula. They lived to the north. They, in fact, dominated the early Romans, the Latin people. But the Romans get some of their interesting practices from the Etruscans. One of them is divination. And divination is basically divining the will of the gods, like the gods are divine. And so they want to get a hold of they want to figure out what the gods' wills are, because their idea of God is that God is really, the gods, the Roman gods were really like superhuman. In other words, they were a lot like humans, except far more powerful. They didn't die; they were immortal, but they had all the foibles, all of the flaws of humans. So basically, this meant that you never knew what the gods might do. They were not consistent. In the Judeo-Christian background, we believe that God is consistent. He is the same today, tomorrow, and forever. But that's not the way the Romans viewed their gods. The gods were capricious. They could do whatever they wanted to do, and if they were in a bad mood, they might do something very bad to you. So you don't want to get on their bad side. Much like, perhaps if you're wanting something from somebody, maybe your boss or your parents, you want to figure out if they're in a good mood or not before you ask, because once you ask, of course, then you get the answer. So if your father's in a bad mood, you want to get some money from him, you go up and ask him. He says, no, get a job, something like that, right? But if he's in a good mood, you might say, well, sure, here's $20, here's 50. What do you need? So in the same way, the Romans wanted to divine the will of the gods to see if they could be in their favor. They certainly did not want the gods on their bad side. And the Etruscans were the ones that did that. It seemed to be where the Romans picked it up. Now, the other thing picked up from them were the gladiatorial games. Gladiatorial games are really a mixture of religious and sort of political things. When they would conquer a foe, that is, the Etruscans would conquer someone in battle, they would then take those people and put them on display in a gladiatorial game. And it was a way to honor those who had died in battle. That is, the Etruscans who had died in battle would be remembered and honored by having those ones that the Etruscans defeated, fight each other in a combat that would often imitate that, and sort of a sacrifice, human sacrifice in a way. So we'll see the gladiatorial games then are important, and the Romans will take that idea and expand it into something, a spectacle that the Etruscans never had. Also, their art and architecture, they take and adapt ideas from the Etruscans. For example, the great Colloquia Maxima, which you can still see today along the Tiber, has a nice name, but it really means the big sewer. The Romans will take that idea and use it in the sort of sewage and plumbing and even the building of cities. A lot of that they're borrowing from the Etruscans. Now, early Rome, we have to remember, I showed you the map earlier of the peninsula, the Italian peninsula. There were several tribes of people on that peninsula. For example, a few of them, the Umbrians, the Oscans, and of course the Latins, which we get the Latin name for the Latin language. The Latins settled along the Tiber near its island. You see it pictured here. This is the Tiber Island, Insula Tiberius. This is it, and this is a bridge across, this modern bridge. This area where the island is about 15 miles to the mouth of the Tiber, where the Romans will establish the city of Ostia, which will become their harbor city. So this is where they settle. There's 7 hills here. Part of the thing that attracts them to this is this island, which makes it easier to cross the river here and to control the flow of shipping along the river. Of course, as we said, it's named for Romulus. I think I'll stop there for now, and maybe we'll pick this up. I don't want to make these too long. So let's end it there for now, and we'll pick it up talking about the Republic